We, we received apologies, Chair, from Councillor Neil and also from Matt Boucher, and Councillor Waltho may be late joining the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2, to report the appointment of any substitutes.
We have one substitute tonight, Chair. We have Councillor Burston acting as substitute for Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Ray. Agenda item 3, to receive any declarations of interest under the Members' Code of Conduct. None. I know Steve Waltho always declares that he's on the board at Russell's Hall, so we can keep that as a standard one, please, Helen.
Chair, I think Steve Waltho's just joined the meeting, so he might want to repeat that.
Okay. Steve, declarations of interest, Councillor Waltho.
Hang on. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. I've just literally got back from the QE in Birmingham. So, yes, the only declaration I always put forward, Mr. Chairman, is that I'm the council's representative on the Council of Governors at Brussels Hall, which is not the decision-making body, but I always make that point.
Thank you, Steve.
Chair,
Yes.
Councillor Kells also indicating to speak.
Jackie, Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to say, because it is on the agenda, it's one of the items. I did at one point receive some of the government food parcels, because I was sort of shielded and stuck on my own. So just declaring that interest, just in case.
Thanks very much for that. And Bal, are you here, Bal? Yes,
I am.
This is general item
evening,
4,
Chair.
The local and national COVID-19 developments. This is a verbal update which we ask for before every meeting from Bal Core. So over to you, Bal.
Okay, just before I start, my colleague Greg has joined me today and he's going to give a quick overview of the data, but I just wanted to just give the current situation with regards to Dudley. You will be aware that last Thursday on the 29th of November at the National Gold Command meeting, a decision was made for Dudley to move to Tier 2 high alert category, with the restriction measures coming into force on the morning of Saturday 31st of October. This decision was based on local COVID alert levels introduced on 13th of October. Our rates in the run-up to the decisions were above 150 and rising quite rapidly and continuing to double every fortnight. So when you see the data that Greg will share, it won't be surprising the rate of sort of increase that we've seen in Dudley population. What was taken into account when the rising cases in terms of the decision to move us to the high alert category was not only the rising cases in our population, but also the rising cases in our over 60s group and the growing pressure on the NHS, including increasing admissions at our local hospital, Dudley Group. Again, you will all be aware on Saturday, our sort of move to Tier 2 was superseded by the decision made by the Prime Minister that England would move into new national restrictions, which most of us will see and refer to as the second national lockdown. Just to reassure the committee, a place-based incident management group has been running, chaired by myself, since September in response to the rising cases, which includes involvement and engagement from all partners working across the system. This is now also attended by the Department of Health and Social Care to ensure that there is governance from the national teams that we are actually responding in an appropriate manner to the rising cases. And again, to reassure the committee, all system partners have stepped up their response and Gold Command meetings are now in place. Whereas, as you were aware, over the sort of summer period, quite a few of our partners and ourselves in the local authority had sort of reverted on the whole to sort of business as usual. But I just want to reassure that everyone that those particular command and control systems have all been stepped up as well. I'll pass you over to Greg now, who'll give you a very quick update on the current data and the picture for Dudley.
Thank you, Val, and good evening, everyone. I've just realised I can't actually share my presentation, so I've just emailed it to Helen, Phil, and Steve. I'm hoping one of them can put it up on the screen quickly. Sorry, I've been disabled from sharing in this meeting. Hopefully Helen, Steve, and Phil are busy looking for it.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't received it, Greg.
Okay, I sent it like probably a minute ago.
Okay, hopefully it'll come through then shortly.
Okay, let me just double check.
Greg, I've given you the sharing rights now, so I should be able to
Okay.
do that.
That'll fantastic. Thank you. Let me just bring it up then. Oops. Okay, there we go then. So this is just a very quick overview on the current situation in Dudley with regards to COVID. So this is a trend line showing the 7-day incident rate. So it's a rolling incident rate of COVID since the beginning of the pandemic, right at the beginning of March, and moving on to the situation that we've got right now. So you'll see on the right-hand side of the chart, pretty much since the end of September, start of October, we've had quite a large increase in the rate in Dudley, which has been climbing quite exponentially. You'll probably notice that the line is now much.
Sorry, Greg. There's a bit of a lag. That's all. You hadn't moved the slide, but it's okay now.
Okay, sorry, apologies. I'll wait a brief moment before carrying on. So you'll see on the right-hand side that the line is significantly higher than it was during the first wave of the pandemic. That's largely down to changes in testing. In the first wave, it was only really hospitals and care homes that were being tested, whereas now we're testing quite widespread in the community. So we're going to pick up more cases as a result of that. I'll just hang on a second until the slides flipped over. So if maybe Phil or the chairman could nod when they can see it. Thank you. Okay, so this is a line showing a trend chart showing our performance in Dudley compared with all the other urban areas across West Midlands. Again, Dudley is the red line, whereas all our urban neighbours are the slightly lighter lines. So for a long time, Dudley had the lowest rate pretty much across all the urban areas, but pretty much since the middle of October, our rate has continued to increase, whilst rates in other areas have started to plateau a little bit. So the rate in Coventry has pretty much levelled out. In Solihull, they had a dip before increasing again. The only urban area in the West Midlands that has a higher rate than we currently do is Sandwell, and we're very close to overtaking them as well. This is the next slide, when it catches up with you guys, is a slide from the public facing dashboard that we have. So anybody can go and have a look at this. And what this shows is the number of cases that we've seen in Dudley over the last 7 days, the 7 days preceding that. Also a column chart showing the curve I just showed you as well. But what that shows is the 7-day incident rate in Dudley is currently 352.7. Whereas in the rest of our urban areas, neighbours, in Sandwell, it's 155. In Wolverhampton, it's not even 300 yet, and Warsaw below us as well with 340. So the increase recently has been quite exponential and very worrying as well. We're still trying to understand exactly what the reasons behind that are. The final slide I'll show you for the time being is the hospital situation. Dudley was lagging behind the rest of the Black Country for quite a while, and Dudley Group has had maybe less stress than other hospitals in the area have done, but the numbers are still increasing quite quickly, and we expect that to continue to increase as the numbers have shot up so steeply. So they're not quite at the peak they were during the first wave, but are definitely heading that direction at the moment. So that's everything I've got to show you. I don't know if anybody's got any questions.
Thank you, Greg. Do you want to add anything to that, Val, before we go to questions?
No, Chair. I think the one thing I do want to say is that whilst our rates were low, we did find it quite challenging to maybe get some of the support that maybe the areas that were in the higher tiers were getting. So there were delays in us actually mobilising our sort of additional testing sites. The 2 testing sites have only been up and running in the last 2 weeks, so our testing rates have increased. So some of our increase might be due to the fact that we are testing more and we're identifying more cases. And in other areas, what we're hearing is that there's a bit of testing fatigue. and so testing rates seem to be on the whole going down, whereas in Dudley our testing rates have increased. Up until more recently, our testing rates were the lowest amongst our combined authority areas. So that is positive, because it means that at least we're identifying, and then hopefully individuals that are being tested are then following the COVID sort of guidance and self-isolating.
Thank you, Val. Councillor Richard Boddy, your hands up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Is there any news yet as the numbers are going that high? Is there any news yet on elective surgery? Are they able to keep going, or do you think it won't be long and they won't do anything? Thank you.
Chair, I'm not sure if anyone from the NHS is on the call.
I don't think they are.
No. I can probably give a response then. Alert levels for the NHS, our local hospital trust, is at level 4, which is one of the highest, and they are going to be, if they haven't already, starting to make decisions about elective surgery because of some of the challenges that the increase in COVID cases are causing.
Thank you. Richard, do you want to come back on that, or is that...
No, thanks.
We have no one from the NHS on board.
No, that's all right, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Cathy Baton next, please.
Thanks, Chair. Val, given the fact that we've now, tomorrow we will be in a national lockdown, are you able to advise on the things that were put in place during the first wave, whether or not they will be being continued for this second wave? And the things that immediately spring to mind are the food provision and the There For You service, the phone helpline.
Through the Chair, Councillor Baton, we will probably cover this in our item actually, because we're talking about those particular vulnerable groups.
Okay, that's fine then. Yeah, that's
we are
fine.
fully prepared. We
okay.
are fully prepared.
Dave, you're on mute.
How did you hear me then, Elaine? Elaine, you're on next.
Your mouth was moving. Right. Sorry, Dave. Right. About because of the swift rise that we've just had in cases, have we any identification yet on what the majority of that rise is, by age, gender, you know, that sort of thing? Is it the more younger people or more older people, or do we have any of that information as yet?
Yes, we have. I think Greg's going to come in on that. We're getting more sort of detailed information on our cases. Greg, do you want to come in?
Yep, thanks, Val. The rise is largely due to people of working age. So we've seen quite a plateauing of people of school age since the half term began. And in people aged 85, there's actually been a reduction over the last week or so. And people aged 65 to 84 rates have also plateaued. So it is really people who are between 18 essentially and 64 where the increase is being seen.
Okay, Elaine. Greg, can I take it, this is a chair, can I take it that in the fullness of time there'll be a big report giving all of this data so we can analyse it in more detail, perhaps at a future scrutiny committee, but that'll take some time. I appreciate it's in the gathering stage at the moment. We have to react to what we've gathered so far.
Yeah,
is
we
right?
do. Absolutely. We do continuous monitoring on a whole range of things. So I could probably spend the whole 3 hours we've got here tonight talking to you about COVID, but I'm sure you don't want to hear that much about it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more
No
councillors? Anyone else wish to ask Val and Greg anything about this? Val?
Chair, we do run a number of member webinars, and we tend to share a bit more detailed data, because obviously this is a public meeting. We have to be careful with what data we can actually put in the public domain. And obviously through now we've got our COVID champions as well. We're using those mechanisms to share a bit more detailed information, so we can target some of our interventions and support. So if members are interested, the next members meeting, I'll find out when that is, and I'll just send it on the group chat. You can always attend that meeting, and Greg can give us a bit more information on the age breakdown, etc. as well.
Thank you. I've now got Councillor Richard Boddy and Councillor Elaine Taylor. Brief ones, if you got them. Richard.
Thanks, Chair. I just wondered, as you said, that there's a rise in 18 to 16-year-old group. Do you know where they're actually coming from? Are there certain areas where there's a spike, such as, is it coming from work, or is it coming from recreation, such as restaurants and pubs? And that? Thank you, Chair.
It's sorry, Belle. Do you want to go ahead?
Greg. No, go on.
No, I was just going to say it's a combination of work and recreation. We were doing welfare checks previously on everybody who tested positive, in which we tried to collect some information on where people thought they may have contracted COVID from. It's also a combination of household spread as well, where one member brings it into the household and then multiple people catch it off that individual. It's very difficult to say with 100% confidence where people have caught it, because they don't know it themselves at the end of the day, and some individuals have been unable to say where they think they may have got it. But we think it's a combination of work, of household spread, and of people going out and enjoying recreation and leisure. In terms of where across the borough, it's spread across the whole borough. So we've got a number of areas where we've got more cases, but there are cases in every single ward in Dudley.
Thank
you, Greg. I'll take it, Richard, that answers your question. Elaine, I see your hand is down.
Yeah, I did try to come back in at the end of my last, but my it wouldn't unmute. But while it's unmuted, can I get this in then? Richard has partly covered what I was going to ask further when it was mentioned 18 to 64. That's a very, very broad range, isn't it? You know, that's a whole, can it not be broken down more than that? You know, because I find that that's almost everybody. So am I taking that is almost everybody then? You know, the majority of people that are out and about. You're saying that this virus is rampant amongst everybody. Is that what we're saying?
Councillor Taylor, sorry, I simplified it maybe a little bit for the sake of time, and to highlight the most at-risk groups, which tend to be the older people. At the moment, we are seeing higher rates in the lower age band of that. So people aged probably from 18 to about 39 is where the largest rates are. We do break it down into 10-year age bands. So you can give it from 18 to 29 and so on up the chain. So at the next members meeting, I'll be happy to go through all that with you if that's all right.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Val. Does that conclude the verbal report, Val?
Yes, it does, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to agenda item 5 now. The first one is financial impact on COVID-19, pages 1 to 12. Ian Newman, I think that's you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the important thing to emphasise here is what it says in paragraph 4 of this report. This is a forecast of the financial position of the council for the year, with a big focus on the impact of COVID-19. But it's a forecast made in the context of a significant level of uncertainty about the path of the virus, the nature of duration of what we'll need to do in response to it, and the economic impact of all of this. And by way of illustration, I wrote this report 2 weeks ago, went on holiday for 1 week, and I've been back for a week after that. And you only need to have listened to what Bal and Greg have been telling us in the last few minutes to just understand how much has changed in just that 2 week period. If I turn you to Appendix A, the list there is at the point I wrote this report 2 weeks ago, all the additional funding to support the council through its COVID-19 response that I was aware of at the time. Since putting that appendix together, along with all of the changes that all of the changes on the ground that Bal and Greg have been talking about in the financial response world, the COVID-19 grant on the top line of that appendix, we have had a 4th round of that general unring-fenced grant, which is there to support our response. That's a further 3.9 million. We now know that we're going into a 4-week lockdown. That will mean that a number of local authority income generating facilities will now have to close for at least another 4 weeks. The expenditure side of the equation doesn't take account of that loss of income, but on the other hand, we now know that we will get more from the sales fees and charges compensation, so we'll get 75p in the pound of those losses. We've now been told that we will be given an additional funding stream called the Contain Outbreak Management Fund, which is to support the local test and trace and contain activities and wider public health measures in response to the pandemic. That will be a further 2.6 million, ring-fenced to those purposes. We know that we're getting around another, I haven't got the exact figure in front of me because I've rounded it in my note here, but approaching another 200,000 in additional funding for support to the clinically extremely vulnerable. We know that there will now be additional support to businesses that will have to close down during the next lockdown period. We've been told by government the level of grants that we need to give to those businesses. Obviously, we don't know how much that will cost at the moment because that depends how many are actually eligible, but the government will reimburse that. We will have been in tier 2 for 5 days, so we're seeking clarification at the moment, but we think there may be some additional funding for support to go businesses just for those 5 days. It won't be at as high a level as the support during the actual lockdown period, but we're waiting for clarification of that. And in addition to all of that, there will be an additional restrictions grant, it's being called, which is 6.4 million for all other discretionary support that we decide to give to businesses. We've just been told of that. We need to take some view about how we apply that. So all of that additional information has come in the space of 2 weeks since this report was written. That's all additional income into the local authority, but obviously what we haven't done yet is to assess what the cost side of the equation will be, what the full scope of the additional costs that the council will incur as a result of managing the pandemic, or indeed what will happen after this lockdown period and what things will look like for the rest of the financial year. We can't possibly know that, because you've seen how fast things are moving in terms of the response to the pandemic. The only other thing I'd like to say on the report is it's all very much focused on the current financial year and the finance support that we're getting for the situation we're in the current year. The big area of unknown is what we're going to get in terms of funding for next year. Even when the immediate health impacts of this pandemic come to an end, inevitably the economic, whenever that is, and we don't know when that is, the economic impacts will inevitably be with us for some time beyond that. So we are waiting with bated breath for the comprehensive spending review, which we expect at the end of the month, so we can then take a view on our position going forward. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. I've got Councillor Ray Burston first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Do we have any idea, Ian, at the scale of the what the tax base is going to look like? You know, because at the moment I would imagine, not to put too fine a point on it, it's probably collapsing given the number of businesses that are likely to go out of operation shortly, and you know, the number of people who are going to start claiming benefits. So, do we have any idea of what we're going to be left with as a tax base?
Our estimate at the moment is that a combination of the effect on our council tax and our business rates, that income will be down by 10 million for the current year. We are able to spread those losses. It's an oddity of how the accounting rules work. In the circumstances, it's a good oddity. Those costs don't hit in the current year. Normally they would hit our general fund next year. The government have introduced measures to allow us to spread those costs over 3 years. What I'm not really able to give a definite figure for at the moment, but I need to produce an estimate within the next month or so we can build it into the budget process, is what the knock-on effects into next year are going to be. People range in their levels of optimism about how quick an economic recovery will be, but I don't think anybody realistically thinks that employment levels and business profitability levels are just going to return to normal by magic on the 1st of April next year. There will be a period of recovery, and during that period we would expect our business rates and council tax to be down. So one of my big questions for the comprehensive spending review at the end of the month is, to what extent will government give us support for those losses? Sorry, that was a long answer to a short question.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Ray, did you want to come back on that?
No, thank you. Just to observe that the government's having to tap into the same tax base as well. So, yeah, it's they're going to struggle for the cash as well.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Jackie Cowell next, please.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 2 questions really. The first one is perhaps fairly straightforward in a sense. It seems to me, looking at the figures, there's 2 fairly obvious areas of strain, and that's around children's and adults' social care, which you perhaps might expect under the situation. You've mentioned a lot of other extra support, and there's a lot in the report, but are we likely to get, do you think, any specific support for that kind of area? And if not, we will be able to continue to support the service and the pressures on it?
In terms of the immediate impact in the current year, there is quite a lot within the funding which is very, very specific to the impacts on adult social care. So in that Appendix A, you can see infection control in care homes. First of all, there was 2.9 million, and then there's an infection control round 2. There's 2.6 million. In terms of children's, there's perhaps there is perhaps less there that is directly related to children's social care, but you can see towards the bottom, as part of the dedicated schools grant, education has got an additional 1.9 million to deal with some of the catch-up issues caused by the pandemic early in the year. What I don't have an answer on, because it's one of those things I'm actually waiting for the CSR for, is how will those areas be supported in future years?
Right, thanks for that. Another sort of wider issue really, which perhaps picks up on some of the earlier questions. We're obviously facing huge uncertainty basically about what we're going to get in, both from government and the sort of tax base, as has been pointed out, and indeed on the spending pressures and whether we have any more lockdowns, etc. If things continue to be really unstable, is it possible that we could be in a situation next year where we actually struggle to set a legal budget because we almost don't know what the numbers are? We don't really know sort of where we are in terms of what we've got and what we can bank on.
By the time we get to full council in March, we will have had a local government finance settlement for next year. So I would fully expect that this side of Christmas we will get a finance settlement for next year. And we will know what our core funding is for next year. What we will also know is that the government has so far during this pandemic recognised the need to keep putting the funding in that was required to deal with the issues. That has continued to happen. So I don't think there is any question that we get to March knowing nothing about our funding for next year. The problem is right at this point in time, I don't know what our funding is for next year, but we'll know a lot more from the comprehensive spending review. That'll give us a good indication of the general level of support into local government, and we'll know even more a couple of weeks after that when we get the finance settlement.
And just one final quick point. Is it waiting for that finance settlement that the reason why we haven't sort of started the scrutiny process at this stage? Is that why there's a slight delay in that?
It is the reason. It's the level of uncertainty that we are in at the moment. The range of potential outcomes. It's almost impossible to work out what level of savings to put in. Officers are working in the background to try and put together the options that you would have to bring into play in a worst case scenario, while all obviously hoping that those options would not need to be implemented.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Chair.
You're on mute, Chair.
Sorry, it's I'm ahead of myself. Kathy Baton next, please.
Thanks, Chair. Ian, you've referenced a number of times about the grants for unring-fenced monies that have come in through COVID and will come in again over the next few weeks. Now, quite rightly so, the council have put a lot of the unring-fenced money into businesses. Now, we brought this up at the last scrutiny meeting where we talked about the difficulties and the unsustainability of the voluntary sector within the borough, and recognising the incredible work that the voluntary sector did the last time we were in COVID, and I imagine we'll step up to the plate and do again. Will there be any reconsideration about forming some sort of fund that, not DCVS, but the voluntary sector organisations who provide all sorts of support during the pandemic are able to tap into? You know, without the voluntary sector working as hard as they have done, the council would have to do a lot more. So, you know, obviously that would then cost us a lot more. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
I think what we now have is with the additional funding that we have available, it is more realistic for us to actually can consider those options. Just today, I've been reflecting on just a number of specific asks that we've had to support organisations where those have been very, very difficult decisions. Some of this additional funding that we have just had, I think, makes it more realistic to address them.
Can I just come back on that, Chair?
Yes.
So can we expect then, Ian, in the next few days or the next week or so to see some announcement on that, so that it gives that sector at least a little bit of surety and security moving forward?
Yeah, we can look at that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Kathy. In the order that hands went up, Councillor Elaine Taylor first, and then Councillor Peter Miller.
Thank you, Chair. So while we're on finance, then general question: have we identified any financial savings that have can be attributed to council staff working from home in terms of mileage, reduced sicknesses, reduced building need, printing, and all that, you know, type of thing?
The answer to that is I couldn't quantify them to you on this call off the top of my head, but within the figures that you were given, yes, we have, where there are some things where costs have reduced, we have factored those in. So yes, there has been some reduction in mileage, and yes, there has definitely been a reduction in printing. I would have probably printed out the papers for tonight, but I'm struggling with jumping between three windows on my screen. So we're all working in that. We're all working in that different way. What I would say is the additional costs of managing this this pandemic greatly outweigh the savings. They're small silver linings on a cloud financially.
Oh, right. Okay.
Thank you. Peter Miller.
It was more or less the same question. The one part of it was, what savings have we made? And the other one I've got is, will we be able to, like last time, I know we were very good at getting money out to businesses who needed it. Will we be able to do that as quick and efficient again as last time? Because the businesses are possibly going to need it more this time than last time.
I think the answer to that is we've got the same people doing the work, and we've also learnt an awful lot about some of the difficulties we had in the back office processes behind all of that. So I would hope it would be at least as efficient.
Okay, can I just add on that, please, Ian, from the chair? Are the same people who had the discretionary grants, the grants last time, and the support, are they still eligible for the next lot? Because you will already have their details on tap, won't you?
The eligibility is going to be different this time. It's going to be a subset of the people that we gave the grants to before. There's a distinction between the discretionary and the mainstream grants, but This time, the main difference, without getting into too much detail, is the mainstream grants are directed at businesses that are required to close as a result of the new arrangements. So, in the first round, in the first lockdown, a lot of businesses received grants that didn't actually require to close. That was the way the rules were. This time, it's more focused on businesses that have to close. What we will have to think about in our discretionary scheme is identifying those businesses that aren't required to close, but are indirectly impacted. So they are reliant on businesses that do have to close. They're a key player in the supply chain to a business that has to close. That's the complication that we're going to have to deal with.
Thank you, Ian. I think just the message that needs to go out from us as a council, and it has to go out clear. I know we got Capital will do the job very well, is to make sure that instead of people being left in the lurch and not knowing what to do, that our message has got to be absolutely perfect so that they can decipher exactly whether they're eligible or not straight away, as early as they can. All right.
Understood.
Councillor Anne Millward.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for letting me ask a question, as I'm only a guest here tonight. Ian, could you just advise whether, well, it may be too early for you to say, whether you've identified any frauds? I mean, I'm aware in other boroughs there's been some massive frauds, and friends of mine who are tax inspectors are finding huge frauds. And have we identified any in the borough as yet?
We identified one, thankfully, before we paid.
Oh, good.
Yes, we did identify one claim for grant masquerading as a well-known chain of purveyors of pastry products.
Yeah, I know who that is. Yeah. Thank you. Dave, you're on mute. Dave, you're on mute.
Chair, you're on mute.
I'll get the hang of it eventually. It's all right. I've got a cough, and that's why I'm muting myself. So the recommendations are that we note the contents of the report. We recognise the unprecedented challenges faced by children's service. Sorry, wrong one. That the committee notes and comments on the contents of this report. So is that okay, everyone? That's an aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Moving on then to paragraph B, Children's Services Response to the COVID Pandemic, pages 13 to 35. Helen, is that you?
It is, Chair, it is.
Thank you.
Can I just thank you as well for allowing me to talk to this paper this evening, because I had to defer it at the last scrutiny due to having an assurance visit from Ofsted at that point. So I just wanted to just say thank you for allowing me to come back and talk through the paper this evening.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not going to go through it in any too much detail because there's quite a lot of detail in the report, and I'm just conscious that you've got a lot of reports to go through. But in essence, as Ian has just described and Bal, this changes quite a lot, and we're able as children's services, the same as other services in the local authority and with partners, is that we've been able to really adapt and shift to the situation that we're currently in. So March, April this year, we went into a world that was quite new. So quickly moving into a virtual world where we closed all of our buildings where we operate from, and we quickly went into supporting children and families virtually. So we have got our MASH and our MASH are currently operating virtually, and with the support of partners. We've been operating child protection conferences and looked after reviews virtually using a variety of methods. And within that, as we've been doing that, we've been checking with families, just checking that they're happy with the way that we're doing things, checking that they're confident, and we've constantly reviewed how we're delivering services, ensuring that we're not missing children, and we're supporting families in the right way. So we quickly, as we moved in, quite a priority during the initial phase of lockdown was to support our child protection, looked after children, child in need children to attend school. So our statutory service worked very closely with schools to ensure that the majority of our vulnerable children attended school, and schools and social workers worked very, very closely. So we continue to do that. As we moved into the summer, we started to open up a number of our builds. So all of our 5 family centres are open, and we deliver contact, what we class as family time, and our residential homes have been open all the way through. We're due to open Corbin Road on the 18th of November. Corbin Road is our social work hub, and we'll continue to open Corbin Road, even though we're entering into the lockdown period tomorrow. So that is really important, that social workers have got that hub, particularly around support, team support, etc. And we'll start moving services such as MASH back into Corbin Road from the 18th of November. Within the report, you'll see, we're just talking about MASH, that our MASH contacts considerably increased during June and July and August, and September have really increased, which will be no surprise, because while the schools were closed or open to key work and vulnerable children, our contacts reduced. So we work closely within the communities, but our biggest referrers into MASH are our schools. So we continue to deal with a significant increase. So we're really trying to manage that resource and that challenge of that increase, and we'll continue to do that effectively with partners. And in terms of working with not just our schools, but we've got our early years providers as well, who we've proactively supported. We've got our childcare sufficiency team, who have proactively supported our early years providers to remain open, the same as schools. So in the beginning of the year, it was for vulnerable children and key work children, but as we moved into September, it's open to all of our children now. So a big piece of activity for us. In terms of early help, as I've described within our family centres, even though our buildings were closed, we were proactively supporting families in the community. So we do carry out home visits using PPE. So not only do our social workers do home visits, etc. We've got family support workers proactively working with the voluntary and community sector as well, supporting families with food, etc. And that activity happened during the summer. Now our buildings are open, we're functioning via those family centres, and we're trying to bring that business as usual back. And that, as I said, will continue from tomorrow as well. So that's not going to change. And we'll keep working hard to support families, mainly our vulnerable families. Also, within the report, there's quite a big section around our youth offending service, and we've been governed a lot from the court activity. Our courts are back, and we're currently dealing with a backlog, and we're trying to kind of keep on top of that. But our youth offending service has been very proactive throughout this period and will continue to be proactive. From an education perspective, we've worked really hard with our schools to remain open, and we've been very lucky as a borough. All of our schools have remained open, and we've worked as an LA closely with all of our schools, regardless of whether they're maintained or academies. We've supported all of our schools, because for us as the LA, it's important, regardless as to whether that school's an academy or not, they're educating the children of Dudley. So for the local authorities, it's important that all of our schools are supported to be open and remain open. Now, our attendance figures, again, within the report show that we've had high attendance from September. So I'm really proud to say that our schools are working tirelessly to ensure that children are attending. And as I've alluded to previously, that from a vulnerability perspective, we continue to work closely with schools. So if schools are concerned about any children in relation to attendance, we're supporting schools to work with families, because at the beginning in September, we were dealing with a lot of families who were very anxious about sending children to school. But we were able to support schools with those anxiety levels, and I'm pleased to say that the majority of our families are quite confident and quite relaxed now about children attending. We monitor all of our schools who are open and not open due to COVID, and that continues to today. So I know at any given point which schools need to close, which year groups are being sent home, which children are being sent home, and we do that cross-reference right across children's services. So we're keeping an eye on children. Within this, over the summer, we did have some activity. We did quite a bit of activity over the summer. Again, just keeping an eye on children to ensure that we were supporting them and helping them to come back in September. So there's quite a lot of activity, and again, that's demonstrated in the report. As far as SEND is concerned, we did have some relaxation with the regulations in May, and we were able to enforce those. But on the whole, in terms of our SEND improvement journey, we've continued to carry on with that. So despite COVID, we've been able to recruit a whole new SEND team. So we've done recruitment and induction and training via virtual means, because again, that's been really an important piece of work for children to continue with that SEND journey. And again, the report details all of that information. And again, as part of that SEND, we've worked hard with parents and families to ensure children with disabilities were supported and are supported back into school. We have had some challenges, and I do need to be honest around trying to get some of our children back, but we continue to work really hard. We are awaiting further DfE guidance, and that's been a bit of a challenge because we've had to work with guidance that's been changed quite a lot and changed quite quickly. So throughout the pandemic, we've had to keep on top of all those guidance changes, and we're awaiting further change in light of the further restrictions from tomorrow. So as it stands, we've got a response It will be different from the beginning. As I said, we're not proposing to close buildings. We're still hoping to continue under COVID restrictions in terms of the building itself, but we'll continue to keep a watching brief on all activity within children's services.
Thank you, Helen. And yeah, it was a no-brainer letting you put this back to this
Thank
meeting.
you.
You had other things on your mind.
We did.
Really, a big thank you, because I am aware that you get instructions on what to do tomorrow morning, tonight.
Yeah.
And it can't be good for anyone to try and run a directorate or a department having these instructions come from on high and skip through the management at council level, and it lands on your desk and you're expected to produce for 9 o'clock the next morning. So thanks for doing all the work you're doing. I've got two councillors with their hands up at the moment, Councillor Peter Lee and then Elaine Taylor. Peter first.
Hello, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. How is the send service recruitment going, Helen? I know I'm just reading that you are still recruiting people to work in that department. So is that going well? Have you got all the staff that you need yet?
Yeah, it's going really, really well. We've recruited all of the staff now, so we're a fully functional team. And as I said, we've recruited during the pandemic, so we've recruited virtually. We've inducted and we've trained during virtually. So we've got a new team that haven't really worked with one another, which is a bit bizarre. So we are, you know, as soon as activity relaxes, hopefully, we will need to get that team together, because it's really important in terms of team bonding. I mean, they have team briefings, they have tried to do teamwork virtually, but it's not the same. Now we've got a team that have all been recruited to. I think that's the next stage for us, but I'm pleased to say we've recruited the whole team now.
Lovely, that's great. I'm with my wife. I'm a foster carer for Dudley Children's. We have 3 SGOs and 1 little girl in placement at the moment. And because we've got SGOs, we're eligible to have 2 more children. So we think we've got 2 more children on the way.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We love it actually, Ellen. We love doing what we do. Giving our bid back. The virtual meetings are working really well with us and the social workers and the children. It's not so intrusive for the child. It's going down really well.
Yeah.
So I'd advocate that be carried on in the future, even when COVID's out the way, to be honest.
Thank you for that feedback, Councillor Lee, because as a result of that, in the report, you'll see that the independent reviewing officers did a survey, and it's very much coming through now that children are liking this approach. So we will take it forward.
Yeah, it is a lot healthier actually. It definitely is with our children anyway. There are a couple of things I am concerned about. And it's regarding the number of social workers that are leaving the Dudley services. It's always been a problem, and we've lost 3 social workers in the last 5-6 weeks that we know of, and that is a bit concerning to me. I know Dudley doesn't pay what the surrounding boroughs pay, and that's probably where it needs to be rectified. And that does concern me, the fact that our social workers are leaving in quite considerable numbers, really. The other thing is, when they do leave, we're not informed. it's quite a long time before we get another social worker, and I'm sending sensitive information along to a phone that's lying dead in a desk somewhere, in a drawer in a desk somewhere. Concerns me, and that obviously we need things to be sorted out. So it'd be nice if we could be told sooner or ASAP when our particular social worker leaves the service, so we're aware of that situation. That's my only criticism on that, really, is if we can be informed sooner about our social workers leaving. And we do get a little bit of a problem, more so of late, of leaving messages if we can't get hold of a certain social worker or something, and they're not being returned. That's my only criticism. And I understand it's a pandemic and we're all working from home and trying to work as best we can. But that is my only criticism. Otherwise, brilliant.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that back.
It's extra hard with this COVID thing going on, and we all appreciate what you do. And as I say, that's my only criticism. Sometimes social workers leave and we don't get told soon enough. So other than that, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter, for raising those points, and I'm sure Helen will take them on. I've got a number of councillors who've put their hands up to speak off the committee, but if you bear with me, I'm going to bring Anne Millwood in now as chair of the Children's Services Select Committee. So Anne, you're in first as the guest.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I would just like to thank Helen. I mean, as you look in the recommendations, you know, that we have to note that there is a new way of working, a new approach. And the teams have stepped up to the mark magnificently, as indeed have all services across the local authority, but particularly children, which is, you know, they're our statutory responsibility. And I think it was very interesting listening to Councillor Pete Lee, you know, put his side of the story with regards to being a foster carer and being a customer as such of this very, very important service. But I was at the Improving Children and Families Board this afternoon, and Helen was there as well. And one of the issues I brought up was lack of communication, but I wasn't directing it at our services. This was coming from a corporate point of view where, you know, we were talking about leadership stability in children's, and that you ring up and somebody's left and nobody's telling you from the top, and that there was an appointments committee for 6 weeks ago when they didn't have a suitable person to become director of children's services for whatever reason. And it would be nice if we were told from the top what is in effect going on. And I will still make this plea as well to Helen, is if we can have some sort of diagram to show us who the staff are, what they're doing and what sits underneath them, and sent out to all councillors, that would be really, really interesting, you know, really, really useful, because sometimes we can't use councillor contact. We have to contact somebody directly in an emergency or a serious situation. But I do think that as chair of Children's Scrutiny, that we applaud, you know, the work that's been done by Helen and her team, and we support them as corporate parents and as councillors all the way through this. So that is just it. I'll put my thanks on record. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Millward.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Elaine Taylor next, please.
Yes, and again, our thanks as well, Helen. Right, Helen, as schools have opened, they all opened in September. When will we have the data to say how consistent that is? You know, from the September intake, when they all opened, to after the half-term intake, and then what sort of intake has been taken up with our children's centres? Is that fully back up? And I know it's back up, they're open, but are we getting the same people back in? You know, is it functioning as we would want it to be, as it was set up for?
Yeah, so regarding school attendance, we've got school attendance. So if that's something that needs to be shared, I can share that. So that's not an issue. So I can work with Steve to look at how we get that data out from September. So we've got that. Our family centres are up and running. We're having to be very careful because of COVID restrictions. I wouldn't say they're back up to where they were because we're having to be really careful. But they are up and running, and the intention is that we do they do come back to where they were, if that makes sense. So they're open to the public, so families can turn up. We're doing home visits, so we are supporting a lot of families, albeit if that's not that they can attend the family centre. As I said, we're doing the home visits as well. So but we're having to be COVID restricted, if you like. So in terms of the 2 meters and having so many people in the building at the same time, staff are working within bubbles, similar to what is happening in school. So they're on a rota, but we're but as I said, we're hoping to get that back to where it was, but we're having to be COVID compliant.
Thank you, Helen. I get all of that. The worry is that a lot of our residents who use the children's centres are very vulnerable, and I would hate for them to slip between the, if we can't accommodate them there, that they would slip between our fingers and we lose contact with them, and especially with the winter coming on where they'll need extra help and things like that. Okay then, thanks Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. I've got Peter Miller next, please. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Helen, you mentioned the FASTA panels being run virtually. I sit on the FASTA panel and they've worked well, and they have been a success, I think. And the other comment I've got to make is that working differently like you have been doing, have you found something out which works better than what you used to sort of do before? Have you found a different way or a better way of working on some things?
Yes, Councillor Miller, I think in terms of what you've just described around the foster panels, and with some of the, as Councillor Lee said, with some of the child protection conferences and the reviews that we do with our looked after children, the feedback coming back is that they prefer it because they find it less threatening because they're actually in their own homes. So a lot of our children are preferring doing things virtually. So what we'll do as a result of some of the activity with the feedback is, after the pandemic, we'll still continue to do some of the work virtually, because if it works for the families, then that's got to be the right thing. The other thing as well is that it does save social work time as well. Because I don't have to travel across the borough, so that helps as well. So we are picking up the good practices, and we will continue with them after the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's good, because some of the children, when the children come in with the foster parents, and the foster parents themselves, you can see how nervous and a little bit frightened they are, which I can understand. They're going into a room full of people for something very important to them and very difficult and an emotional time. So it possibly could be a lot better way of doing things.
Absolutely.
And for me to say that about using computers must be a wonder.
Thank you both. I've got 2 more councillors now. Councillor Kathy Baton and then Jackie Carroll, please.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a number of points and questions that I'd like to put to Helen. Firstly, Helen, I was looking at the information around the Youth Offending Service, and whilst I understand that much of that isn't within the local authority gift in terms of not being able to visit the secure estate. I would like to register my real concerns about social workers and young persons advisors not being able to visit and meet our young people in custody, and the video link is absolutely no substitute for being able to sit with a young person and talk to them. You know, having done that myself for over 20 years within children's services, I understand the value of that. So I do think that we should be making representation to push that, to try to have face-to-face in a secure and a safe way. But for me, it remains an issue and a level of concern. And whilst I don't expect you to have an answer to it, because I know there isn't one, you know, I just feel it's important to register that concern.
Yeah, and I think just to say, Councillor Baton, on that one, that we feel the same, and I think as a group of DCSs, we've registered that as well, so we'll continue to do that.
Thank you, and I'd also like to see our independent safeguarding chair making representation along those lines as well, because you know we know that the risk of suicide and self-harm in young offenders institutions, particularly for our young men, is extremely high. You know, and it's important that we make sure that the monitoring is there. So I'd like to make that a request of the independent safeguarding chair, please, as well. I just want to come back to page 18, where we look at the contacts in the MASH. And obviously we saw and this excludes the domestic abuse contact. We saw a huge spike in June, July and August, which I guess is only to be expected. And I suppose it's flipping on the head a little bit the earlier comments about the positive or the opportunities around remote working. The establishment of the MASH was about having professionals together in the same location, in the same room. And I take your point earlier that you are looking at opening Corbin Road, as you know, in the future, soon. But nevertheless, we've been without Corbin Road, I'm guessing, for 8 months now.
Yeah.
So have we lost anything because of that within the MASH? And I think I heard somewhere that there had been a reduction in staffing within the MASH under the previous interim head.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, so there was, and we've reinstated that back. So we've put additional support into MASH, particularly managers. So we've got sufficient management oversight in relation to the increase in contact. So there was a decision that was made, and we reinstated that back straight away. And as I said, there's additional management capacity in MASH now. In terms of the multi-agency activity, that hasn't really reduced as a result of working virtually. In fact, it's enhanced it. So because we've got partners that it's easier to work virtually, I suppose, than physically at times, because you're able to, the capacity is easier virtually. You know, we've got more attendance at strategy meetings now virtually than we did physically. So that isn't the case, but initially it was the right thing at that point. But going forward now, there is a view that MASH need to be together as time goes on. So initially it was okay, and we immobilised it very quickly, and it was okay for that period. But as I said, as time goes on, it's not really the right thing to do. So the right thing to do for me is to keep going to open Corbin Road on the 18th of November. And that's taken a bit longer because it's got to be COVID compliant, lots of health and safety, risk assessments with staff, etc. But the position is we will open, and MASH is the first service back.
Okay, that's reassuring. Can I also pick up, please, on page 23 of the report, item 63, where you talk about the contribution of health partners to early help assessments. Now, just reading that comment, and I might be interpreting it wrongly, it suggests that some of our partners are perhaps not stepping up to the mark in terms of the requirements with our early help assessment, our early led assessments. And given the fact that, you know, we know in Dudley nationally we are really poor on school readiness, and things like speech and language are absolutely critical to school readiness. Am I interpreting it correctly to start with? And then secondly, if I am, what's the strategy in place to address this?
Yeah, you are interpreting it correctly. At the beginning of the year, and this is something we've kind of been working with our health colleagues on in particular, because at the beginning of the year, a number of our health colleagues were called back, so health visitors, school nurses, etc., to support the COVID response. So that did have a knock-on effect on us as children's services, because we were left literally holding the baby almost. So we've as time's gone on through the partnership board, we've kind of challenged that, and we've been assured that that's not going to happen going into this second lockdown. So yesterday we had a brilliant working group through Scrutiny around early years, and all of our health colleagues were on the call yesterday. So our maternity services, our health visitors, etc., public health were on, and we were particularly talking about the early years element, because there is some really good work happening through the Early Years Transformation Academy, and we were assured again that services like health visitors would not be pulled away, because there is quite a significant consequence to doing that, particularly around 2-year-old checks, etc.
Yeah.
So we've been assured through the partnership that our partners will be here working with us going forward. So again, at the time we were able to sustain it, but there's only so long you can sustain it as a local authority as well. Yeah. So for me it's important, as we go into our second lockdown, is that support's not taken away from partners.
Can I just ask one other very quick question, Chair?
Yes, carry on, Kathy.
Anecdotally, I've heard nationally there has been an increase in elective home education over it, even while schools have been open. Parents have made the decision that they want to educate their children at home. Now, I remember having many conversations with Councillor Ridney about elective home education in the borough. Is this something that we've seen an increase in?
Yes, we have. Initially, the first 2 weeks in September, it was quite high. That's plateaued now, and through quite a bit of work, we've been able to reassure those families, and a big proportion of those children are in school now. So it was an initial anxiety that we've supported. But that's not to say that the numbers have increased. The numbers have increased, not just for Dudley, but as you said, across the country. And that's something both DFE and Ofsted are keeping a watching brief on at the moment. So we're supporting that. We're looking at additional capacity for EHE because of the growing number. But as I said, that's DFE and Ofsted are keeping an eye on that as well.
I mean, that's reassuring to hear, because obviously where you've got children in elective home education, there's no oversight of their development and their progress and their safety. So, the fact that you've been able to proactively work with families to give them the confidence to have children back in school. But I think the idea of developing the capacity to have somebody perhaps more dedicated to that work going forward, because this isn't going away, is absolutely critical. And I'll shut up now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Jackie Cowell, and then I've got Anne Millwood later.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 3 points, basically. Going back to the child protection conferences, I know a couple of other colleagues have said how well they're working, and it may be because I'm not as sort of directly involved with the sort of children's services and fostering, etc. But one concern I had was that potentially it does refer, I think, to having telephone conversations prior to a virtual conference, and I just wondered whether that potentially risked missing something. But like I said, that may be due to my own sort of inexperience and lack of understanding. I just wondered whether that had been a problem at all, or whether that was a risk.
No, I mean the telephone conversations are about preparing children and families before the actual virtual call. So those conversations happen quite a lot beforehand, just to make sure that there's confidence and preparation during those conferences.
Right. So previously it wouldn't have been the case that there was some sort of a physical visit?
There would have been a physical visit or even a telephone call, but I think the way that we're having to work, because it's virtually, that we're having to do a lot of pre-work before the virtual calls.
Right. Okay. So there's no doubt, I suppose in effect that what I'm saying is that there's no danger of if there's some problem or something that it would be missed by virtue of the fact that it's a virtual meeting rather than perhaps people going in and seeing the physical environment. I suppose that's what I'm trying to get at. But...
Yeah, I think there's never a guarantee when you're doing things virtually, hence why there's other systems that we have to consider, not just one system. Particularly, we risk assess all the time, so if we're particularly anxious about a family, we would go and visit. Okay. So social workers are visiting with PPE, so COVID will not stop us going to see a child.
Okay, that's great. And there was another one, it's referenced in paragraph 30 around partnership working. There was a suggestion that some of our partners weren't as willing to go into homes, and it was left, just to the social workers. I wondered whether that had improved and we got some of the other agencies picking up now.
Yeah, it's really improved now as we've moved in through the changes, particularly over the summer into September. That's changed.
Right. And one final point. I mean, obviously, I won't go into details on this call for obvious reasons. But I think it was the first week in lockdown, somebody contacted me with some concerns around a child. And I know that they then contacted Childline, and then they also contacted, I presume it was the MASH. They certainly spoke to somebody in Children's Services, but they weren't actually spoken to then for about 2 or 3 weeks. There seemed to be some delay somewhere. And I wondered if that was just sort of a blip or whether there was a problem related to COVID.
I couldn't say without understanding that specific example, but I would like to know about that example. Right. Because there shouldn't be a delay, not with MASH at all.
Right.
So
I know that somebody went out eventually. I'm not sure exactly which officer it was, but I'll certainly let you know some of the details.
Please.
So you can check on that.
Please.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, first, can I just thank all the other people who are waiting in the wings to give their reports. We've got 2 quick second hands up from Councillor Anne Millwood and then Councillor Peter Lee, please.
Right, if I go first then, Chair, it's just very, very quickly, it's to answer Kathy with regards to elective home education, which was an issue that we flagged up, as Helen will testify, at one of our Children's Scrutiny Committee meetings. You know, we did see a massive increase in the number of families who were seeking to electively home educate, but as Helen has said, it has gone down. But I actually wrote to Gavin Williamson about this because there's very little national legislation that governs this, and I do think that it's a disgrace. I'm still awaiting a response from Gavin Williamson, so rest assured, Kathy, we are on the case.
Thank you, Anne. Peter, you're next. Peter Hopwood. Peter Lee.
Hello.
Hello, you're on.
Yeah, okay. I've just got a couple of things, Chair, for Ellen. We understand, like in some cases, face-to-face with a social worker and a child is essential. That's inevitable, that has to be said. The virtual meetings are great for our social workers, considering they're under considerable strain, and it might be the way forward for more of that to be carried out with our social workers for the future when we get rid of this pandemic, because it frees them up. It's a lot quicker and it frees them up to do more important work. It's all important work, but to get on with more important things perhaps. So yeah, I'm liking the virtual thing at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Helen. Thanks for your reports. We now come to the recommendations, and the recommendations are: 1, the scrutiny notes the contents of the report. 2, scrutiny recognise the unprecedented challenges faced by children's services and the way in which staff have responded. 3, scrutiny endorse the children's services response to COVID-19 and recognise that this new way of working, can I add in there, please, members of the committee, including virtual and IT services, will continue for the foreseeable future? Because I think that way we get the virtual into the recommendations, and that will then ensure that it continues until such time as we can sort out. Because we've been dragged into using virtual technology, which would have taken us 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get it all in line. We did it within 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
we don't need to go back to the old ways.
No.
And if we've found ways of doing it, so I'll add that. Helen, if you can add that into that recommendation. And just to pick up on Councillor Anne Millwood's point, a 4th scrutiny point, if I may, is that scrutiny acknowledges that staff changes do take place and asks that members be made aware of positions vacant and filled, and by whom.
Thank you.
So we can do that as a recommendation from this committee, and that way it's on record, and we'll get an answer of someone somewhere sometime.
Thank you.
Is that agreed, members?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm leaving. Goodbye.
Thank you, Anne.
Bye.
Agenda item 5C now, and I'm sorry for the delay in getting there, but I think members will appreciate that children's services have been under the cosh, and it was only right to give them a fair hearing on that. Paul Manford, I think this is yours. The impact of COVID-19 on business and employment and skill support, pages 36 to 42. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, whilst the report details primarily the work of the Dudley Business First team and the employment and skills team within Regeneration Enterprise, I think what's really clear to come across is the huge amount of work that's been undertaken from teams across the council, and primarily colleagues in revenues and benefit, audit and finance, as well as colleagues from across Regeneration Enterprise, in terms of administering the COVID-19 business grants that were launched in March. So initially there was around about 4,500 businesses that were identified as being eligible for the small business grants and the retail hospitality grants. So over the course of a 4-week period, there was a coordinated approach across the teams in terms of contacting those businesses. There was also then the government launched the discretionary business grant scheme, which the Dudley Business First team again led on, but was coordinated through other teams. And across all the COVID business grants, I think a real success story is the amount of money that we got out to businesses across those 3 grants. So in total, there's just over 58 million of grants awarded to 5,270 businesses in Dudley. And I think it just goes to show the huge amount of effort from across directorates to come together to actually contact businesses, to process the grants, and to ensure that there was a robust system in place, as Ian mentioned previously, to ensure that the amount of fraudulent claims to date has been low. So I think that was a fantastic achievement. Dudley Business First have also continued to provide support to businesses through a grant programme and the Aim for Goal programme, and also a Startup Dudley programme, and both of these have now been delivered online. There's also been a huge amount of work around supporting businesses in terms of the reopening of our town centres and high streets. And again, colleagues in Regeneration Enterprise, as well as CAPA and colleagues from across public realm have done a huge amount of work in terms of both the promotional campaign to ensure that social distancing is adhered to, but also through introduction of physical barriers to ensure that social distancing can be maintained in our town centres. In terms of the employment and skills support, the real focus from late March was around ensuring that our learners were still able to continue to learn as a result of lockdown. So there's a huge amount of work done initially in terms of switching some of the delivery to more of an online delivery focus. And over the course of lockdown, we've delivered over about 80 classes to around 600 learners. There's also an element of how we look to support learners who didn't have access to the internet and technology, and that was around about 150 learners. So as part of that, we ensured that workbooks were posted out and that the work was completed and returned. We're also successful in setting up 2 virtual learning environments, which have delivered over 20 online courses to residents. I think in total, over 650 local residents have been supported to continue their learning, and over 171 qualifications have been completed, with a further 130 new residents sign up for adult and learning programmes over the course of the lockdown period. The post-16 skills team have also continued to work with partners across the region, including the Combined Authority and Job Centre Plus, to ensure that any apprentices and employees who have been affected by COVID-19 in terms of their employment status are continued to be supported back into employment as soon as possible. I think in terms of the support moving forward, I think as Ian alluded to, the report to a certain extent is out of date because it referred to information around the ending of the job retention scheme and the introduction of the job support scheme, and obviously that has now changed as a result of the recent announcements around the national lockdown. In addition, we're just getting information today around the future business grant scheme that will be around to support businesses. So obviously we're working through that as quick as possible. And I think in terms of the business support, that will be the primary focus going forward again is how we can ensure that the grants that have been allocated to the local authority are dispersed as quickly as possible. And I think as Ian alluded to, there's an element of through the additional restrictions grant, an element of discretion again, that we need to look at the criteria with that and how we look to apply that in Dudley. I think there's also work going on again through colleagues in the employment and skills teams in terms of some of the support that's been announced around employment support. So we're looking at potentially becoming an intermediary organisation to deliver on the government's Kickstarter scheme, where we look to work with local employees and local residents to identify 6-month-long work placement opportunities for those that may well have been affected through furlough and unemployment. And we're also working with colleagues in health and social care around a care gateway scheme that's recently been developed to support residents who may have an interest in the care sector. We've already seen some successful learners placed in a local care home through that scheme. I think finally we're also looking at an extension of the successful Black Country Impact Programme, which has provided employment and training support for 16 to 19-year-olds. And obviously, in terms of the economic impact that furlough may well have, there will be an ongoing requirement for increased employment support for individuals to get back into paid employment. So I think it's crucial that we look to do all we can to access some of the funding streams that are available for that support going forward. I think that ends the brief, Chair, if there's any questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Are there any members wish to? Councillor Jackie Cowell first, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Sorry, I've just lost it. Yeah, there's a reference at paragraph 24 to the number of new claimants, and you talk in your report, Paul, about support for learners. I just wondered if there was any support for people who are newly unemployed, possibly for the first time in quite some time, and actually don't have access to technology. I wondered if there was any support for them in terms of how they could apply for jobs, because these days, without being online, really, it's quite difficult. And I wonder if there's any work going on around that.
Yeah, so there's still, we're working obviously closely with DWP and job centres around how residents who don't have access to technology can still access that employment support. And through the Black Country Impact Programme, certainly within the sort of 16 to 29-year-old bracket, we can provide that support. And I think through the Kickstarter scheme going forward, again, that provides the opportunity to work with employers and local residents who have recently been made redundant in order to provide that support. So whilst I think there is a push to the online provision, we are still recognising that there's a need to engage with those individuals that don't necessarily have access to technology. And I think one of the through the European funding programme, there's an opportunity to bid in for some money around digital inclusion, where we can actually look to fund or look to gain some funding so that those individuals that don't have access to technology devices, we can actually loan those out so that they're then able to access support in that way. And we're waiting to hear on that funding to see if the Black Country's been successful in that. So there will be some opportunities there as well.
Well, that's great. What worried me was obviously with the restrictions on people meeting and the lack of access to some public spaces. I thought that might impact on people's ability to use sort of public computers, so that might make matters actually worse.
I mean, just to say as well, we have still our neighbourhood learning centres are still open for face-to-face learning as well. So there's an opportunity there to still support individuals who haven't got access to technology.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor Steve Waltho, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for that presentation, Paul. Really following on from Councillor Cowell's question and representing one of the most deprived wards in the borough, I wonder if we've got an idea of the profile of the new claimants, the age, the gender, the ethnicity, that sort of thing. And following on from that, I was quite interested in paragraph 20, I think it is, on page 39, about the Dudley Regeneration Academy. I've never heard of that. Perhaps you could explain what that does.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, in terms of the claimant profile, is that something that I can provide to members following the meeting tonight? It's not something I've got to hand at the minute, but I'd be happy to provide that at a later date.
Please, Paul.
Yeah, in terms of the Dudley Regen Academy. It's something that we've been working with Dudley College and the Combined Authority on, and it's really linked to all the regeneration projects that are currently going on within the town centre, and trying to ensure that local residents benefit from the sort of potential employment opportunities linked to some of the construction contracts that are coming forward. So the initial one that we're focusing on at the minute is the Dudley College Institute of Technology at Tipton Road. So there's been quite a lot of dialogue with the Speller Metcalfe, who are the construction appointed construction company for that development, about working with them at looking at how we can get some in the immediacy, some short-term sort of work placement opportunities for local residents, and then build on that so that we can work with them to get CSCS accreditation for on-site work, and then look at any future opportunities within the construction supply chain. So it's something that's in its infancy, but given all the regeneration activities that are going on in the town centre, it's something that we want to replicate across some of the other developments, so that we start to have early conversations with developers and contractors to identify what those opportunities are for local residents.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Steve.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. I didn't know what it was. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Cathy Baton then.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to pick up a little bit on Steve Walthow's previous point. We have to, and it fits in really with the whole thing around skill and us moving forward. How do we know we've got this right? Unless we understand the sectors that the job losses in Dudley are occurring in. So are they high skilled jobs we're losing? Are they low skilled, low education jobs that we're losing? Until we understand that, it's really difficult to put together an adequate skill strategy that is going to see us over the coming months and years. So I do think that profiling is absolutely critical, but with a real emphasis on the current level of jobs that we're losing alongside the number of jobs we're losing. We know within the West Midlands as a whole that the claimant numbers have doubled since the beginning of March up to, I think, the beginning to September. So we can expect that that number is going to go up significantly. If I can just pick up on, and it cross-references back to the children's report as well. So where we talk about the, let me just get the point. Sorry. In the children's report, we talk about the year 11, year 12, year 13 students who are not going to go on to further or higher education because of possibly the financial impact, the issues around their courses, whether they can leave home or whether they can't. How is our adult learning team and our skills agenda picking up that group of people? They're absolutely critical to re-engage. We know that if young people are out of education and out of training for any length of time, the longer they're out of it, the harder it is for them to get back into it. So how are we working with our schools and our colleges to identify those that have currently dropped out or are on the verge of dropping out of education, to make sure that we capture them so that they don't become the statistics of this COVID campaign? You'll have to excuse me, I'm really frustrated, but I've got bangs going off everywhere, there's fireworks going off, and it's really putting me off. So, but yeah, if you could come back on that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Cathy. Helen may be able to come in as well. There is a what they call a NEAT steering group, so not in education, skills or training, steering group that works across both within sort of John Cunningham's employment and skills team, and also works with Helen's team in terms of the connections and the post-16 element there. We also work very closely with Job Centre Plus and obviously colleagues from the Combined Authority. So there is a group that is actively looking at that, and I think you're correct, Kathy, is that and Councillor Waltho, that intelligence is the key to understanding where not just the immediate unemployment figures and skills gaps are going, but also looking into the future. So I think some of the initial numbers that we're seeing an increase in the claimant numbers, and maybe as a result of you know, the impact that COVID has on the retail sector, and obviously linked into that in terms of the regeneration, it's looking at the future of our high streets and how as communities we actively use those high streets, and there may well be a need to look at shifting in terms of the reliance on retail as a sector within the borough, but also looking at the increase and the opportunities around jobs within the health and social care sector within the borough as a result of COVID. So I think you're right, there's a real need for that intelligence, and it's something that we are working with partners on in terms of developing and helping to sort of drive forward that skills strategy.
Thank you, Paul. Any further questions from any members? No? Paul, I don't know if I don't know if I'm batting on the wrong wicket here, but a lot of the stuff you've talked about has been all about businesses and educational establishments and combined authority, etc., etc. But I think there's a big wedge of people out there that we're not tapping into. If you look at DCVS, it's got a massive footprint throughout Dudley Borough. The churches have picked up the youth service, which has been stripped back over many, many years to the point of non-existent. So the youth service and uniformed youth groups and youth groups running churches and by the third sector, that's a massive swathe of people out there that I think we could try and capture. I don't know if it falls under your remit or someone else's remit, but we've also got not just the people who've left college or left school without educational achievement, but we're now going to move into a phase where there'll be a lot of people in their mid-20s, mid-30s, mid-40s who are going to be out of work from this point onwards. And a lot of these people will be working in the third sector, really just to keep their hand in. And I think there's a mechanism here. If we could capture all of those people that use these services and are part of this bigger, wider community circle, and bring them into the training and expertise that you've got. I don't know if I'm talking right, or whether it's feasible or possible, because I think all the institutions you've talked about are bona fide institutions as opposed to people on the fringes. Sorry.
No, and just to come back, we've been doing a piece of work, we've been having conversations with Loaves and Fishes at top of Dudley High Street in terms of how we can maybe work with them as a pilot around that social enterprise and community groups, and how we can work with those groups to tap into the I guess the people that maybe not engage with the mainstream support, as you acknowledge there. So I think that's, you're right there, and I think that's something that we do need to look at going forward, and how we work with these groups.
Thanks, Paul. It's a pet subject of mine. It isn't just youngsters that are going to be difficulty finding work. It's people who've been made redundant with a skill which no longer exists in their workplace, but they might have a couple of kids and a mortgage and bills to pay. So we need to do everything we can for them as well. Councillor Kathy Baton next.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. It's just reminded me, a while ago at Cabinet, I asked about the ability for social value to be attached to public sector contracts. So when you talk about the regeneration of the town centre and all of the big projects we've got going on, and the ability then to attach to those schemes a percentage of local workforce. I think I've had conflicting advice come back on this, so I do think it's something worth pursuing to see whether or not there are any loopholes whereby we can attach social value. We're in really difficult times, and Dudley is, you know, if you look on the indices of deprivation, overall Dudley has a relatively low educational and skill base before we hit the pandemic. So with all of the other demands this pandemic is placing on people, anything I think that we can do in terms of our procurement processes, embedding social value and making sure, even if it's not, if we can't attach paid employment expectations to contracts, if we can attach work experience to contracts, our residents have to get something out of these projects that are being delivered in the borough, and not just ship in workforce to meet that need. So anything that you can do at your level, Paul, in terms of regeneration, I think is absolutely critical.
Thanks, Cathy. I think the challenge is, I think where the council is procuring the contractor to deliver on some of the projects, we can include the social value element in those contracts. I think the challenge comes is where, for instance, like the Dudley College scenario, is where the appointment of the contractor is via the college. So, and I think that's the model we've tried to develop through the Dudley Regen Academy, where across anchor institutions within Dudley, we start to have those conversations early about what opportunities there are for local residents to benefit from that, where potentially we don't have the sway in terms of the procurement contract, but because we're having those early conversations with partners, we can have those discussions with the contractors about the opportunities.
Can I just come back on that? Where we've got anchor institutions and the development of the Towns Fund Board, I would really expect our anchor institutions to want to deliver the best possible outcomes for the residents of this borough, and I'd be really concerned if they are not prepared to work with us on that and really push that and make it part of their procurements. So those conversations are welcome, but I would have expected it to be a given that they would be supportive.
And I think they are, Cathy, and I think where they're accessing funding through the likes of the combined authority, there is a sort of social value element that we can work into those conversations as well.
Okay, Cathy.
Thanks. Yes, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks for taking on board all the points we've raised. I've seen you writing away. Whether we can get anywhere with the points that we've raised, it's going to be down the line, I know that, but I think they're points well meant and well raised anyway. So the recommendation is that the committee notes the contents of the report and the actions being taken by the director to ensure the continuation of business support and employment and skills support services across the borough, and to consider the planned interventions for business and employment and skills support as part of the COVID-19 response. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Now, D is report of the interim director. Val, this is yours on the impact on specific communities.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this report builds on the previous 3 reports that we've presented to Scrutiny, and I know there's been quite a lot of detail in those reports, and I think this one's very detailed as well, but it just gives you sort of the range of work that Public Health and Wellbeing Directorate has been delivering, and we wouldn't have been able to do this without the collaborative nature of the work and the partnerships that have contributed to this. So my colleague Karen's going to lead on this, but hopefully the report gives you assurance that we have actually been working with specific community groups and are prepared for this next phase of the COVID response. So I'll pass over to Karen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Yes, the report is detailed. If I could just pull out some sort of overarching key points, if that's okay. Firstly, that this is very much a joint response. It's not, we haven't sort of been working in isolation on our own. It's very much working with partners, both within the council and other agencies. Secondly, just to say that obviously there's emerging local and national evidence that COVID has greater impact on some specific communities. We've got some sort of interim information, but we are doing a full sort of impact assessment on behalf, as part of the joint strategic assessment process of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and as that is further developed, that will further underpin the sort of measures we put in place. The measures in this report include both universal measures and also targeted measures. If I can also just sort of highlight that, so in terms of the universal measures, we've really tried to embed an inclusive approach in everything that we've done in terms of the development of the outbreak plan and our response to COVID. For example, through the the engagement and co-production approach that has been taken. For example, through the development of the subgroups, which have focused on some of the higher at-risk communities and vulnerable communities, and those subgroups that lead the work have a very diverse membership as well. We've used very varied engagement and communication mechanisms, COVID champions at one end, also webinars, meetings, campaigns, surveys, key influencers within specific communities, and also networks of existing organisations, particularly around some of our more vulnerable communities. So basically a whole range of different mechanisms have been used so that we can be assured that we are meeting all parts of our community. The other thing that we do constantly, obviously, is monitor the demographics of the impact of COVID on an ongoing basis, and that can also then inform the sort of the measures that we put in place. So that's the sort of a universal approach that we're taking. But we have also done targeted work. So, for example, the report details some of the specific work that we've done around the BAME communities, and that is now being headed up by a sub-board of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and that will, as well as focusing on some of the here and now, will really be looking at some of the longer term, wider inequalities issues in relation to BAME communities. We've done targeted webinars on keeping safe and well, and we've done specific work with the Lai Roma communities around food, housing, employment, benefits and welfare, for example, and traveller sites, ensuring that they have access to the public health measures and information and welfare checks, support and advice. There's also been work around community cohesion and the tensions, and overall Dudley is we're assessed as low in terms of our community tensions at the moment. We've also worked with partners to put in place support, particularly around food, medication, well-being, benefits, etc., advice for the groups of people that are considered clinically at high risk and also extremely high risk. So that's the shielding. Ensuring that they've got essential food and medication, and although not in the report, obviously, as a result of announcements and we're going into lockdown, that's now being stepped up again, so that there will be support for people to access the food and medication and other support that they need. There has also been a number of measures put in place for people that might be experiencing poor mental well-being, and also for those that are financially struggling as well, such as the welfare assistance grant that's already been mentioned, where sort of supporting and ensuring that that's getting to the people that need it. And then there's work around the free school meals vouchers as well. So that's sort of the report in a nutshell. All the detail is there. Before we go on to questions, we've got Greg Barbosa with us as well today, who's going to just give a bit of a sort of a snapshot of some of the information, the data that we have so far in relation to the local impact of communities, specific communities in Dudley. So I'm just going to hand over to Greg.
Thanks, Karen. I'm just going to quickly talk through some work that one of my team did, Elaine Evans. So this is very much looking at the impact of COVID on the BAME community within Dudley in comparison to the white community. Okay, so first of all, the first chart shows the total number of cases that we've had in Dudley for the BAME community and the white community, represented as a rate per 100,000. So you can see from this chart that throughout the whole of the pandemic, people from a BAME background are almost twice as likely to get COVID as people from a white background. We don't know the outcomes of these individuals, so that's not to say they all had a very severe outcome. This is just based on the testing data. If we break this down by pillar 1 and pillar 2, so pillar 1 is people who've had a test via the NHS or via a care home. Pillar 2 is community testing. That you can see in pillar 1, the rates are relatively even between BAME and white communities, whereas in pillar 2, we see a lot more people getting community testing from BAME backgrounds who are testing positive than white people in terms of rate. If we look at the absolute number of people, then the number of people in the BAME community is lower than the white group because we've got a smaller BAME population than white population in Dudley. In terms of the changing rate throughout the pandemic, towards the beginning of the pandemic, it's fairly even. In sort of late August, early September, then that's when we started seeing higher cases in the BAME community than the white community, a high rate, which has carried on pretty much ever since. More recently, we are seeing a much quicker rate of growth in the white community than we are in the BAME community. If we have a look at this in terms of a percentage change, comparing the last 28 days with the 28 days preceding that, they can see that 28 days ago, over the last 28 days, the incident rate for the BAME community was 629. In the 28 days preceding that, it was only 131, whereas in the white community, it isn't the rate change, it's the number of cases. In the white community, it was 459. Sorry, I've just got the charts completely backwards. So the blue is a white community and the orange is a BAME community. Apologies for that. The BAME community were more heavily hit earlier on, but have seen a smaller percentage increase over the last 28 days compared to the white community. Although in both time periods, they are overrepresented compared to the white community as well. Apologies for that. If we break this down by age group, then we can have a look at the different impact at different age groups. Again, the orange is BAME community and the white community is blue. So in all age ranges, the BAME community have got a higher incident rate than the white community do as well. And I think the next graph, 2 graphs on will demonstrate exactly what it is. This graph just shows the change in incident rate over the last 28 days and the 28 days preceding that. Although the BAME community have a higher incident rate for each of the age groups, the percentage change between the two 28-day periods is actually larger in the majority of white groups. The only exception to that is the 16 to 19. So what this is showing is that although if you're a BAME member in Dudley, you're more likely to have had COVID, the situation is changing a little bit and it's becoming increasingly common for people from a white background to get COVID. And the final chart is just having a look at the deprivation impact. So this is looking at the BAME and white community in Dudley by deprivation decile. So 1 being the most deprived and 5 being the least deprived. A larger proportion of the BME community in Dudley live in the more deprived areas than in the more affluent areas. So that maybe has some bearing on this as well. But what we'll see in this chart is that the BAME community disproportionately have a larger number of people who are in the most deprived group compared to the white ethnic population. With white ethnic population, the difference between each of the deciles is fairly minor. It's only a small percentage change, whereas in the BAME community, the majority of them are in the first and second quintiles compared to the other quintiles. Okay, has anybody got any questions?
Any questions? Ray Burston, Councillor Ray Burston.
Yeah, thank you. Do we know what that result would turn out if we were comparing apples with apples and pears with pears? In other words, if we've got a white and a non-white person, both from the same economic group, both from the same type of employment, both from the same family domestic setup, would that show any variation? Is it just a case that non-white people are more susceptible to it, period? Even stripping out deprivation and things like that.
I'm not sure we can draw too many conclusions. I think we can standardise for a few elements. So in the chart that's on your screen now, then this is essentially standardising for deprivation. So we can say for a deprived BAME community person living in the most deprived area and a deprived white person living in the most deprived area, a BAME person is more likely to have COVID, but there are a whole number of factors that influence that. We believe that people from BAME communities work in more high-risk occupations. People from BAME communities often live in more crowded households than people from white backgrounds. So there'll be a number of factors, and trying to adjust for all of those is something we don't have the data to do at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Chair, can I just come in at this
yes,
point
please,
as well? Yes, I think the other thing what we don't really understand is the patterns of testing, because as you know, there was a lot of media coverage about the risk factors for BAME. So one of the things we don't fully understand is that BAME communities might have been coming forward more for testing because of the heightened sort of concerns. So that is probably another situation that obviously as we get more intelligence and data, that we might be able to understand in more as well. And it might be now that actually those we've done a lot of engagement work with specific community groups, and actually what we might now be seeing is actually that the reduction in incident is actually having that, the messaging is having that impact, and we're now starting to see higher rates in the rest of the population.
Thank you, Val. Can I just say, before I bring Elaine Taylor in, Greg, you've produced some incredible charts for us over the last few weeks, and it really does concentrate the mind on when you look at the changes that are happening within the borough. It occurs to me that we may want to produce some of these charts in our final report, Val. So whether it be appropriate to produce the charts that we can produce within our final report. But of course, they'd all have to have a date on, because it wouldn't mean anything to anyone at the far end if they didn't see a date. You've probably got the date set somewhere anyway. But it just occurs to me that it would fill our report out and give a great deal of gravity to our report if we could produce such documentation. Right,
Yes, we can do, Chair. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can. We can. The ones we presented here, we can, because they're obviously in the public domain.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Elaine Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my questions are more to do with the when Val presented rather than Greg. So sorry, when Karen presented rather than Greg, it's to do with the financial support, page 54. So shall I take it now, or do you want to finish with?
Do it now, please, Elaine.
Do it now. Okay then. I find it very difficult on reading what's been going on with the financial struggling of some of our residents. In this paragraph here, it tells me that 401 applications were processed, yet less than half of those were given. Now, at this point, I'm assuming that most of these people felt that they needed assistance. So what was there for them that didn't get the assistance? You know, were they then looked at in a different criteria? Is the criteria that was set up for them to fail so that they didn't meet this criteria? It seems to me that we've failed more than half of those people that asked for emergency assistance. Then further on down, the government also offered £500 payment to people that are self-isolating. Again, this is, you know, out of 71 applications, it says 33 were refused right away. 35 have not supplied the right evidence. So again, is this set up for these people for it to fail? You know, with all these people that are asking for the help, and surely they're not getting it if all these people have failed to qualify. And then it leads me on to the negative impact on the people that have fallen through because they don't meet the criteria. What are we doing to help these other people? You know, it doesn't tell me in here anything about the ones that we, you know, who clearly needed that help, but they failed to get it. Does anything make sense, or am I reading it all wrong?
No, that's fine. I think some of it is because they're in a process of being going through the application, so that the numbers reflect that. But there are definitely specific criteria that are set up around the delivery of the grant, and also the sort of the constraints that we have as a council. So as a result of that, particularly in relation to the emergency welfare assistance scheme, we're now working with our partners in the voluntary sector through DCVS and other organisations to basically put the money into that area, so that because there's more flexibility there, and so we're looking to ensure that the money reaches the people that do need it, including those who, for instance, haven't got bank accounts, and those who have no recourse to public funds. So we'll be able to cover all of those. So that's ongoing at the moment. But it was before this report was written. It's been after this report was written.
But it's very worrying. I'm sorry to come back on this. It's very, very worrying that only 3 people actually received payment on the latter part of what I asked you about the self-isolation, the £500. Only 3 people actually qualified for that. Only got paid for that. Or again, am I not reading that right?
No, I mean at that particular time you're reading it right. When this report was written, the system had only just really been set up, so there was a few teething problems and things with it. So I'm hoping that those figures are better now. You know, but again, there are a sort of specific criteria that are in place that does make it more difficult for some people to access that support.
It doesn't really help, you know, because I still think that we're failing a good many people who are asking us for help. That's what it reads to me like. So, but thank you for your reply. And can we have the up-to-date data when it does come through, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, through the chair, I was going to suggest that we do a bit of an analysis on the people that have been turned down, just so that we understand, because there will obviously be some people that will apply even though they might not be clear about the criteria. So I think it would be helpful for us to do a bit of an analysis on this. But what we have also been doing is, as part of our welfare calls, we have been contacting people and writing to people who may not necessarily always qualify for this payment, but for support in terms of helping them self-isolate. So we can also give you some information on that, because we've made sure we've kept that sort of system in place to make sure people struggling to get maybe food if they're self-isolating and other support, get that support from us.
Thank you, Val.
I think Ian might have wanted to come in.
I suspect it's the finance answer, Ian.
Sorry, just to jump in there on the self-isolation payments, I haven't got the precise number in front of me, but I was shown it earlier in the day, and I think it's approaching nearer 100 now.
Thank you. All right. Okay, Elaine, thank you for that. Councillor Jackie Carroll, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick one from me, really. I wondered whether it would be possible to circulate the slides that Greg's just shown us. I think that information would be quite useful.
Yep, one of my team has put it together in a report format with lots of context, so I'll make sure that's circulated so you can get that all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Cathy Baton.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on page 54, item 55. So that's the children eligible for free school meals. And I don't really want to rehearse the political arguments that have gone on up to this point. I think we're now in a different world. We know now we are into a further lockdown. And whilst everything will be done to keep schools open, we know that due at half term, I think there were 5 primaries in the borough who had extended school closures due to COVID outbreaks. So one can only expect that will continue across over the coming months. It's been evidenced in the slides that Greg demonstrated earlier that the impact of COVID has disproportionate impacts on specific groups. And we know that deprivation is one of those groups where there is a disproportionate impact. So, Chair, I'd like to actually make a recommendation to put to the committee on this and propose that the council going forwards supports the free school meal vouchers as per the first wave of COVID, that this continues for all school holidays and extended school closures where restrictions of COVID and pressures are in place for those families whose children fit the eligibility criteria. I do think it's absolutely critical that we consider how we are going to support families going forward. As I say, I don't want to rehearse. There's no point in rehearsing the political arguments that have gone before us. What we need to do is make sure as a council we are able to step up to the plate and do the right thing going forwards for our families. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cathy. I'm going to ask Cathy to read that again, and then I'll go around the members of the committee because I didn't manage to write it down because it went too quick for me. So, Cathy, could you read that again, please?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so the recommendation that I'm proposing the committee adopts is for the council going forward to support the free school meals vouchers as per the first wave of COVID. That this continues for all school holidays and extended school closures where restrictions and pressures due to COVID are in place. That this continues for families whose children fit the eligibility criteria for free school meals.
Right, thanks. Can you do me a favour as well, Cathy? Can you put that in the chat?
We'll do it now.
And then members can have a look at that. Does any member wish to say anything about the additional recommendation that we're going to put in? Elaine Taylor.
Yes, I only caught part of that, so I'll wait for Cathy to write it. But I fully support this. I think that, especially with the finances of some of our really, really poorer residents, this would be a godsend to them, especially with the winter pressures as well. Christmas is just round the corner, but for every holiday it would make it a lot easier for our very, very vulnerable low earning families and children that their school meal is sometimes the only meal they get, you know. And I think if we gave it in vouchers that were that had to be spent on food, then, you know, that really does make sense. Thank you, Kathy. That's really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, is it in the chat room yet?
I'm typing as we speak. Bear with me.
All right. I think it's just fair that we let members see it in writing before we go back to them and ask to agree or not. Bear with us.
Chair, Councillor Waltho is indicating to speak.
Yeah, Steve Waltho, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And while Kathy's typing away there, as you'd expect me to say in response to that, is to give it my absolute full support. Indeed, we had a number of residents over the last school holiday, a week or so ago, approach us, and in trying to open a new facility at the Sledmere Community Centre, we actually set up a sports session each day, but also a mini food bank for those people coming along with the young children and those with of mouth to pick up a food parcel, which we provided to the children on the day as well. And it was extremely well received and respected, I can tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Richard Boddy, you're next.
Well, thanks, Chair. I have heard the recommendation twice, and I can only agree. So I don't have to read it. Thank you.
Right. I'm just checking. It is in the chat room. Sorry to be pedantic about this, but I think it's only right we read it first. Councillor Lee, Peter Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, in response to the free children's school meals, they shouldn't be stopped at all, in my opinion. I've already voiced my opinion on this with our group. Just because the school's closed, these kids rely on this one meal a day, and I'm strongly in agreement that it should be kept on and left for our children to have at least one good meal, guaranteed good meal, irrespective of whether school's closed or what. A meal should be provided for these kids. Free school meals are only issued to children that are in need of the service. So no way should it be stopped. And I'm glad that Dudley Council found a way of getting round this, thanks to all the staff there and Patrick Harley for making sure that our kids got that free school meal in the last half term. And I'm very much looking forward to Easter, well, Christmas, Easter, and that should continue on for them as well. Thanks, Chair.
Hang on, do you know if COVID's going to go on through Christmas and Easter?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Do you know that COVID's still going to be with us next Easter? Only joking. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I presume we've all had time to read it now. If your hand's up and you don't need to speak, put it down. Right. Read it. Is that additional recommendation agreed? Councillor Richard Boddy? No, you've gone. Ray Burston, Councillor Burston.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's superfluous, really, because the leader's already committed himself to providing this facility. So, you know, it's academic. It's there. You know, Dudley Council will feed its children.
Okay, right. That's good to hear. So we'll do that. So is everybody agreed that we'll put that in as the recommendation number 2? There are 2 recommendations here. Recommended that the Scrutiny Committee note the work being undertaken and continue to support the COVID-19 response. And the second one is that the Council going forward support the FSM's vouchers as per waiver of 1 of COVID, that this continues for all school holidays, extended school closure periods due to the COVID pressures for families who meet the criteria for FSM. Is that agreed?
Agreed, Chair.
Yes.
I agree.
Yes.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for that.
Chair,
Okay.
sorry, we've just got Councillor Miller indicating to speak.
Oh, sorry, Peter, I missed you. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, I agree with what Councillor Lees and Councillor Burson said. We are already doing something about it.
All right. Well,
I
we'll get it
do
in.
slightly worry, but how far, and I'm not being nasty or funny when I say it, how far are we going to keep on doing this?
Well,
Because people honestly have got to learn to stand on their own 2 feet.
Well, at the moment, Peter, we've got a position where we've been thrust into a second lockdown. I'm hoping, fingers and toes crossed, that this is the final lockdown. But I'm realistic enough to know that if we don't get it right between now and the new year, we could actually finish up going to another lockdown at some point in the future. So we have to really put something in print, really, just to secure the well-being, really, of the youngsters that are in our charge.
I agree with looking after them,
Okay, all right.
but I do
Thanks
think
for
we're a
raising the
bit
point.
hard at times.
All right. Okay, thanks very much. So that recommendations are approved. We'll move on now to item E, changes in working practices and use of new technology.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a report in 2 parts. It covers the changes that we have made in working practices across the board from an employer perspective, but also the use of technology during the pandemic. And so I'm going to very quickly highlight some issues from the working practices side of things, and Andy Tromond will pick up the use of technology. But I think before I do some quick highlights, just to make the point that this is a retrospective report, and actually this work that we've been doing has been constant. It hasn't been that we made the changes, you know, at the beginning of March and then just sat and watched them kind of take effect. We have had this continuous need to be updating our practice as guidance has changed, as things have moved on. And even though this is a retrospective piece, I'm conscious that members may well be interested in what we're doing for the forthcoming lockdown as well. And to that end, I have got a couple of members of my wider HR and OD team present if members want to ask any detailed questions in relation to that. About looking at the adjustments that we've needed to make to our people management policies, our working practices and our procedures to enable us to continue to deliver our services during lockdown. And as has already been brought to life through presentations made already this evening. I think Helen brought to light some of the issues around having to work from home. The fact is that we have seen 2/3 of the workforce during this period either fully or partially working from home, and quite a lot of those people continue to work from home and have been working from home for more than 6 months, and that has required us to work differently, obviously conducting a lot of our meetings virtually, and that in itself has required us to develop a whole new set of skills in terms of how we work, but also in terms of personal resilience, because I think actually there's been a host of issues for our workforce around isolation, but also just having to manage the whole impact of the COVID pandemic on their lives, and that balance that they've needed to bring in terms of delivering, doing their job, but also looking after their families and caring for children for much of that period who have had to be at home. So just to highlight some of the things that we have done during this period, we have had to be more responsive in terms of how we engage with our employees. It's been more important that we're having regular conversations and keeping in touch with people who are working remotely. In terms of our engagement, we've had to be much quicker in terms of the work that we've done around our employee survey. So we moved from having a biannual survey to having a pulse survey that was in place within a few weeks and completed within 4 weeks with feedback 2 weeks later. And some of that information is in the report highlighted for members to see. But also we've had to be able to undertake targeted engagement. And I think already the points have been made about the impact of COVID on BAME communities. And so we've had to also undertake targeted engagement with some of our employees from those communities who have been particularly anxious about the impact on their health and well-being. We have had to deploy staff, and we've worked quite closely with DCVS, for example, in terms of supporting the food banks and deploying staff who have been unable to work because facilities have closed. So we have been more flexible and agile in terms of deploying staff to areas of greatest need. And also, as has already been said, we've had to recruit and manage staff virtually, and we've been able to do that quite successfully. The final point I'll make just before I hand over to Andy, I think one of the key issues for us has been about how we support our employees, particularly in terms of, there's been some great things that have come out of changing the way that we work. We've been more collaborative, we've been more focused, that's great. But at the other end of the spectrum, it's been the impact on mental health and well-being, and the need for us to be really investing in work to support our employees, and we continue to do that. So I'll pause there and give Andy an opportunity to pick up the issues around technology, and then thereafter happy to take any comments or questions from members. So over to you, Andy.
Okay, thanks Jackie. Evening all. I think the principal point, and again I won't go through all of the detail in there. The principal point I'd just like to draw members' attention to is the range really of things that we've done through IT provision to enable the council to work in different ways, and I think I've put some bullet points under item 7 there, which again there's lots of numbers in there. I think one of the major cultural shifts I think has been, as Jackie was saying, the use of as virtual meetings, and we've heard that mentioned a number of times this evening. So that was something that we needed to respond to fairly rapidly. We did have a virtual meeting product called WebEx, which was quite old, so we had to very quickly roll out Microsoft Teams in a period literally of a couple of weeks, and I think that some of the numbers there give you an indication of the massive take-up that there's been for virtual meetings and online chat. And obviously we're also using Teams to enable public meetings like this one, and including full council. I think on the telephony side, for some time, again, the council had soft phone technology, but it wasn't particularly being exploited to the extent that it could be. So again, there's been a rapid uptake of that, which you can see from the number of calls that have been made. The volume generally of electronic communications has dramatically increased. So we've seen quite a number of an increase in the number of emails that we're being processed each day. So very roughly, that's around about a 25% increase on pre-lockdown levels that we were seeing. One of the key challenges that we've had to try and give people the equipment that they need was to rapidly source and build lots of laptops. That wasn't easy because there were global shortages of computer components because everybody else was doing the same thing essentially at the same time. But we did manage to provide over 1,000 new laptops, and we've also introduced policies to allow staff to take other equipment home so that they're as productive as they can be working from home. some of the traffic on the website, we saw a definite increase from citizens as they moved to using the website as a service point. Obviously, Dudley Council Plus had to close at the start of lockdown, so the website and our online forms were a key channel for us there. Our own support staff again had to respond fairly quickly to the fact that lots of people were having to work from home who had never done so before. So we had to respond to that in a different way. So we redeployed staff to bring that about. I think we mentioned earlier the recognition that there's been a great reduction in the amount of paper that we're printing. And also because staff haven't got access to franking facilities, we expanded the use of our existing electronic direct mail service. So the way that works is that files are stored in a central point and they're then picked up and printed by our print unit. So they're automatically then enveloped and collected by Royal Mail from a central point. The website generally, I think I'm sure colleagues from CAPA would agree, has been a key communication platform to deliver the council's information on COVID, and also to enable some of the other work that we were hearing about earlier in terms of online forms to claim the various grants administered by the council. Well, on payments, obviously when Dudley Council Plus did close, we lost the ability for people to pay by cash using the kiosks. But actually, by analysing a sample of payments, we could see that many of those people that formerly paid by cash had moved to alternative payment channels. And I think really just to perhaps wrap up, the major message is that really none of that I don't think would have worked without the willingness of staff to take on board those new ways of working, supported by HR and OD staff along with IT to develop some support and learning materials to enable them to do that. And I think as you mentioned earlier, Chair, I think the key challenge for us now is to keep the benefits that we've seen from this new way of working, while still making sure that we deliver the right services that the people need. So happy to take questions on any of the IT aspects of that. And is there anything else you want to add, Jackie?
No, thank you.
Councillor Jackie Cowell.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points. First of all, on the top of page 60, the first bullet point refers to cash payments sort of moving, as I think Andrew's just referred to, moving to direct debit, etc. Yep. I just wondered whether we'd maintained any facility for those who perhaps without the right bank facilities simply couldn't do it by direct debit, etc., and actually did need to rely on cash. Or certainly going forward, whether we will look to, it's probably a small group, but nevertheless an important group. And I wondered whether we got any support for them. And the other question was around staff. And obviously, as the report indicates, large numbers are currently working from home. I just wanted an assurance really that as we perhaps eventually move, and of course in between lockdowns potentially, we try and move staff back, that staff will only be moved back to a physical environment if they feel safe to do so, particularly if they've got certain vulnerabilities. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Chair, can I take the first
yes,
part
please.
of that, and then maybe Jackie can comment on the second. In terms of cash payers, Councillor Cowell, yes, they do still have the ability to pay by cash, not through council locations, so they can pay at post offices, they can pay at any locations that are identified as using the PayPoint service. So they are still able to pay by cash if that's what they want. I think what I was trying to indicate earlier is the analysis that we've done has shown that actually people, many people were actually prepared to make the shift to either telephone payments or to direct debits.
Okay, any more, Jackie?
Yeah, and just to, sorry, there's two of us as Jackie, so I wasn't sure which which one it was. So, Councillor Cowell, just to reassure yourself and other members that we are very clear that you know, and have plans and arrangements in place that endorse that we wouldn't be moving staff back to buildings until such point that those buildings and those staff are safe. And clearly there will be a number of our employees who you know, are more vulnerable, and we've got a number of risk assessments in place to ensure that we're picking up individual requirements for each and every member of every team, so that we can take account of individual circumstances as part of that as well. So just want to reassure you that that is the case.
Thank you. Is that okay, Jackie Cowell? Thank you. Kathy Baton, please.
Thanks, Chair. My questions are both for Jackie, and I've got two, Jackie. So page 58, item 4, for the purposes of absence management, are all COVID-related absences either because of a need to self-isolate due to test and trace, or a COVID positive test discounted for the purpose of the Bradford factor scoring?
Yes, Councillor Baton, that is the case. And even where people have to self-isolate, very early on we adjusted the attendance management policy to take all of those circumstances outside of the Bradford factor, and we continue to do so.
That's good. That's very reassuring to hear. So excellent work for that. And the other point I'd just like to raise with you. So I worked for the authority for many, many years and was an active trade unionist and health and safety officer. So for anybody at that point to work from home, a risk assessment of their working environment, workstation needed to be undertaken, and where appropriate, safe storage of any documentation that they might be keeping. I'm guessing that COVID kind of superseded all of that, and that obviously everybody moved to, where appropriate, where possible, moved to working from home. What are you going to be carrying out retrospective risk assessments of workstations? And I'm thinking of that from two perspectives, really. One, that's to protect the employee from musculoskeletal issues and not, you know, unsafe, unhealthy working environments, but also to protect the council going forward for any possible claims that could be made for failures of risk assessments being undertaken. Thank you.
So through the chair, if I may respond.
Yeah.
So obviously we moved very quickly to working from home, and I think the arrangements, I think the expectation was initially it was going to be a few weeks, and a few weeks in we realised that actually what we needed to do was make sure that you know, managers were reminded of the need for there to be you know, workplace, well, assessments made in terms of the working arrangements that they've got at home. And we have done some further work with our health and safety colleagues to ensure that all of that information and all of the tools that are needed for that to happen on an ongoing basis is in place, and that managers are undertaking that. So just to say, I don't think we ever had a situation where people were at home for months and months and months and no review was undertaken. I think quite early on we'd provided resources to managers and briefings and tools to ensure that that was happening, and we've been working very closely with the trade unions, who would not allow us to get away with not doing that, and meeting with them on a fortnightly basis in terms of some of these amended policies and resources for managers to use.
Thank you.
Okay, Kathy.
Yeah, thanks.
Any more questions from members or not? No.
Yes, Dave.
Oh, Elaine Taylor. Yes, sorry, Elaine.
Thank you. Right. My issue is with the ICT itself. Over the years, it's our ICT hasn't been the best, I've got to say. And how confident are we that we're going to be able, because of the new norm of working from home and using more ICT for meetings such as like this one we're on now, how confident are we that the ICT system we've got now and are working with are able to sustain the level of the ICT that's needed moving forward?
Would you like me to respond, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you for that, Councillor Taylor. I mean, I think if you'd like to let me know maybe separately what elements specifically you're concerned about with IT, happy to pick that up. But I mean, generally, the situation is that, as I say, we've provided a lot of new equipment for staff to use by way of laptops. Some of the existing laptops that people had, we've carried out upgrades to enable them to run software better, such as Microsoft Teams that we're using now. We've also invested in new technology to improve the speed of connections between the council's data centres and people's homes. Obviously, we can't. There's a limit to how much control we can have over people's own broadband or Wi-Fi within the home, and I think a number of issues undoubtedly have occurred due to that. We have been liaising with our suppliers who manage the remote connection facility for us, and I'm aware that there are a number of issues that are still under investigation with them. We've carried out a number of changes, for example, on our email service, which I know is different from the service that members use, but the email service that staff use. We've carried out a number of corrective actions to try and improve both the size of emails when they're stored, the amount of emails that are actually held within the system, and also the way that emails are transferred between laptops and the council's network. So I think we certainly recognise that there are challenges due to working in this way. We have made some changes. We're aware that further issues do need to be looked into. If there's anything that specifically you want us to pay some attention to, more than happy to have that dialogue with you.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really helpful. Part of it is from my own perspective that I'm not really very competent with IT, and I'm sure I'm not on my own. And if the support, I just feel that we need to be sure that the support is there when we need it, and that our IT system can support that. And you've answered part of it. Well, most of it, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. If you think you're struggling, my grandfather was a signalman in the Boer War, and I'll take after him. So give me 2 flags or a pigeon any day.
We must be related somewhere along the line then, Dave.
Right. Thanks for that. I mean, there's just a couple of points that I'd like to raise, if you wouldn't mind. We've suddenly had to procure 1,000 laptops. So obviously there's an income, there's a cost to that, which may already have been in the budgets. I presume so. But at some point, those laptops, because all IT equipment only has a shelf life of so many years with renewals and upgrades and what have you, I presume that your future plan has taken account of this massive influx of today's equipment to be replaced as and when. So that's one question. Anybody want to answer that?
Okay, yeah, I'll make an initial response to that, Chair, and Ian might possibly want to chip in as well. The laptops that have been purchased and some of the other measures that that I was talking about earlier as well, yes, have incurred additional costs. I think when Ian was presenting his report, there were some items of expenditure in there out of the grants that we had received specific to IT. Yes. Correct. IT hardware does have a shelf life, if you like. It does have an anticipated life, so that will be something that we'll need to manage over the next 4 or 5 years. I would expect, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And moving back to page 60, paragraph 7, the last bullet point. We've already spoken about this, how we rapidly moved to using ICT. And it's critical, really, that we do a really honest assessment of what we can keep of the ICT equipment and the remote working. We've already heard, particularly from Children's Services tonight, how crucial that was and how well respected it was when they went to that. Courses for courses, and there's going to be some departments and directorates that won't be able to do that in its entirety. But we need to grasp hold of this advancement as quickly as we can and change the rules, so to speak, because we've been forced to change the rules. So I know you'll do that. So that's just a point, really. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much for your report, both. Thank you, Jackie. And
thank you, Chair.
We'll read the recommendations. It's recommended that the committee note the report and comment on the issues set out below. We've noted the report, so thank you very much for that. Okay. The next report is democratic services during COVID-19. Steve, is this you?
It is me, Chair. Thank you very much. Just to, by way of introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to bring this report to members tonight. Hopefully, I won't read the report through because it tells its own story about how we've managed to maintain the Council's governance arrangements and essential decision-making processes during the pandemic, in line with the Council's constitution and government regulations. I think the report actually builds on the last agenda item quite nicely, actually, in terms of all the new ways of working that we've had to implement. And obviously, I'd like to thank my own team in Democratic Services, but also all colleagues across the authority, particularly those in ICT, that have helped us to achieve this. But also to all members of the Council for the support and the patience that you've shown. And the commitment there's been to make this work. So using the remote technology, Microsoft Teams primarily, we've managed to deliver the full cycle of full council, cabinet, committee meetings, try to keep all the essential democratic decision making going, the oversight and scrutiny, keep it running. We've got, obviously, I know there are mixed views on the use of Microsoft Teams, and many members, I'm sure, would like to be in the council chamber behind me. I'm not actually in there tonight, but the indications are that we've got following representations that have been made to government, is that they may well consider extending the regulations to permit remote meetings after the pandemic, so that we can take advantage of the benefits of the ways of working that we've seen. So I'm interested in members' views, particularly on their experiences of the new ways of working, not necessarily tonight, because hopefully you all know where I live and you can speak to me anytime. But also I want to mention at this point, and I've included it in the report, but one of our key challenges this year was to run the school appeals for the school admission appeals during the main tranche of appeals. And I'm really pleased to say that that we did do that, in obviously with the help of our colleagues in school admissions. So we held 216 appeals and rising virtually on Microsoft Teams, which I think is a major achievement. And I think the feedback we've had on that and how they've operated has been very positive. So, Chair, I'd ask you to look at the report that's before you and give any comments or questions. I'll be happy to take them.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Peter Lee, please.
Chair, mine's just a bit of jest, really. I'll be very quick. I'm glad Steve answered that question about him not being in the chamber, because I thought, well, he's either on a large pair of steps or he's hanging from a piece of rope. So I appreciate what he's just cleared up there, and I must admit I missed the chamber. It's lovely to see it then. So thank you for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor, hang on, is it Kathy? Kathy Baton, yeah.
Of course, I couldn't let the final report go without asking something on it, could I? So I suppose there's two things. I know early doors we were not allowed to even consider hybrid full council meetings. So I suppose the question is, going forward, Steve, do you anticipate us being able to have some sort of hybrid arrangement in the future? And secondly, whilst we are holding full council on Teams, I'm presuming that we will be returning at some point to motions and debating those motions and then voting. So what voting mechanism will be put in place to ensure that we can conduct business democratically?
Yes, through you, Chair. In terms of hybrid meetings, yes, they are possible. And we were starting to look at doing more of those over the last couple of weeks. We've had some physical meetings with people attending remotely. We've held them in the town hall, and we were looking to extend that potentially, as you say, to full council. However, with the new restrictions coming in from tomorrow, we have to take a step back from that for the time being. But hybrid meetings we could do them under the regulations that are in place. In terms of voting, the Members ICT working group met a few weeks ago and discussed this very issue, and we spoke about the possibility of a feature in Teams to allow electronic remote voting rather than just putting the electronic hand up that you usually use to request to speak. So we are working with ICT to see if we can develop that further so we can have a proper voting mechanism with a view to going back to the situation where the council can vote on motions. I'm also very mindful, and if Ian's still on the call, which I know he is, come the council meeting in March or February, March, when we have to do the council tax, then we do have to have a named recorded vote. So the work on that will continue, so we can hopefully restore some normality to the voting arrangements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Another one, Kathy?
No, that's fine. I'll lower my hand. Thank you.
Okay. Any more councillors wish to say anything on this report? No. I had a light bulb moment, because we've had all these reports over the last few months, and it suddenly occurred to me, without democratic services, none of this could have happened. So we've got to take our hat off to Steve and our clerk Helen for all the hard work that they've put into this. This has been a massive task for them, and I do appreciate it. I know all of you appreciate their hard work as well. So, but I think it's only right that we have a report that tells that fits into the main body of the report, just to say that they were there from day one. And I do appreciate Steve, so thank you very much indeed.
I agree with that, Chair. Well done, Democratic Services. They've all done a superb job. Thank you.
She's hiding at the moment, but Helen has been a star. So.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll certainly will communicate those kind words back to the team.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Steve. The recommendations are to note the actions and procedures put in place to maintain continuity of council business and essential decision making during the COVID-19 pandemic, and to review and comment on the operation of the council's democratic services and associated governance arrangements during the COVID-19 pandemic, and provide feedback on how the new ways of working could be developed in the future. We've gone through that ad infin item tonight, so we're going to move forward on that. So is that agreed? I'll take that as a yes. All right.
Yes, Chair.
So the final report then is a verbal update from Phil Parker from Kappa on the communications.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for waiting, Phil.
No problem at all. No problem. Evening all. Appreciate it's been a long evening, and I will not keep you too long. At the start of this process, I met with the chair, who was keen that the communications was, a golden thread, if you like, that runs through everything in relation to many topics, but certainly in terms of the pandemic. So, as members will recall, at the previous two COVID-19 focused scrutiny meetings, I have provided comprehensive presentations of activity to illustrate to members the multi-channel approach that we've utilised throughout the pandemic to reach targeted audiences across the borough. The first one of these was obviously extensive, as it picked up from March the 23rd when we first went into lockdown, right the way through to that first scrutiny meeting on September the 3rd. And the second one was a bit of a follow-up piece to that on October the 15th meeting, which was a sort of 6-week catch-up period from that first meeting through to the second. Through the chair, it's been agreed that as the last meeting was actually only 3 weeks ago, on October the 15th, it didn't feel like there'd be great value in trying to provide a sort of a timeline of a 3-week update. So instead of that, tonight we've looked to provide members with a detailed snapshot of activity around 2 key comms priorities which have occurred in recent weeks. These 2 areas are Dudley's move from tier 1 to tier 2 into the on the alert system, and then also the launch of the 2 new testing sites in the borough. And I will just pop up on screen. There's probably links back. Can everyone see that? Is that okay?
Yes.
This links back really to probably to Bal's opening remarks at the start of the evening as well, so it probably brings it back full circle in many ways. If I just whiz through the intro. So in terms of tier 2, it's interesting, isn't it? They say a week's a long time in politics. It's certainly been a long time in the last 7 days in terms of communicating the pandemic in Dudley, because 7 days ago we were in tier 1, anticipating a move to go into tier 2. We were waiting on Public Health England to give us the final confirmation, and that came last Thursday at around 3 o'clock. And from that point on, we in comms were waiting anxiously to then trigger a whole series of communications to go out across the borough to ensure that residents and businesses were aware of the additional restrictions that we're going to apply in their lives. So the screen in front of you just gives you a feel, again, in similar format to what we've done in previous meetings, of that reach that we get through those channels. And this is just over really a 4-day period of from e-bulletins being sent out, as you can see, to 147,000 addresses, 43% open rate, which is very good compared to national figures, as you can see there. The Twitter reach, again, very significant, 21,000 people seeing that over the weekend. And indeed the news releases, and that's online on the website that Andy Troman's just mentioned. A key comms channel has been the council website. The business bulletin, very similar to the resident bulletin, very high read rates, and obviously key to get that information out to businesses as the restrictions changed for them. And then Facebook, and again the web page is there on coronavirus, as I say, and our colleagues in the local and regional media supporting us with both editorial